Caroline left Bern in the fall of 1882, and in the spring of 1883 they moved back to Bern, and he and his brother Christian operated a dairy north of Bern on property owned by Christian. Open range became a pressing problem, so in the spring of 1884 Robert filed on a homestead in Raymond next to his father-in-law John Eschler. In October of 1884, when John and David received and accepted their mission calls to Switzerland, William, who was trying to regroup after losing his wife, Eliza Eschler, and their first son, John William, through death, had moved for the winter to the Taylor Ranch east of Paris to cover a contract for David in order for David to be able to serve. In the fall of 1884, Robert felt it necessary to abandon his homestead in Raymond and move his wife Caroline and Emma C., their only child, to Wardboro, taking over and running William's place, and remaining there until he found out he could not get title to the land he was farming. So he bought a relinquishment from Arnold Eschler and built himself a good home. This relinquishment was to property still in Wardboro. Arnold Eschler was Robert's brother-in-law. Robert goes on to say that he then helped to build the dam on Bear River and the canal into Montpelier, which was a lot of hard work, but through this endeavor he obtained a good water right, which allowed him to water 100 acres, 60 of which was in timothy and alfalfa. He said he put up an enormous amount of hay. Robert says that he had a beautiful spring on the hill above his house, which he piped to the house. It was stated in a tribute to Robert and Caroline Kunz by Devereux A. Kunz, that was Bud, that it was thought to be the first house in Bear Lake to have running water actually inside the house. The 12 years that Robert was at Wardboro, which appears to have been from 1885 to about 1897, he was able to get a nice home with water piped into it from a spring, and he had water rights from the Montpelier Canal for 100 acres of his 160-acre farm. While Robert and Caroline were at Wardboro, they were doing quite well financially. While Robert and Caroline were at Wardboro, their family was increasing. While there, the following children were born: Robert H., born October 22, 1886, Alvin N., born September 14, 1888, Orlando Lewis, born December 7, 1890, Rosanna, born October 19, 1892, Ella Grace, born February 7, 1895, and Irma Laverne, born May 19, 1897. The birth of Irma Laverne in May of 1897 at Wardboro indicates that Robert and his family were still in Wardboro at least through May of 1897. Sometime in 1895, Robert became sympathetic with his brother, who had become heavily involved, and mortgaged his home and farm to assist them in obtaining needed cash quickly, based apparently on their promises. Robert says that at this time he took another financial setback through being too sympathetic with my brothers, and it seemed as though the only alternative was for them to get my house to save them from financial ruin, which I did on good promises, which they were unable to keep, and my good turn was soon forgotten when I moved back to Bern with a large family. Robert and Caroline and their family of 7 were still living in Wardboro in May of 1897 when Irma Laverne was born. but shortly thereafter they lost their home and ranch at Wardboro and moved to a place in the hills above Bern known as Hoopgubble, where he again took up farming and dairying. I built a 2-room rough sawn frame cabin with only rusty flat boards on the outside. Our 8th child, Earl Dewey, was born in that cabin on the 17th of June, 1899. I lived there 2 summers, and I saw I could not exist there, so I sold my improvements for a set of harnesses and a wagon. That was virtually all I received for my former home at Wardboro. Robert and his family moved back down to Bern in the fall of 1898 into the old home that his dad had built in Bern in 1875. Robert tells of his activity in the Wardboro ward prior to his receiving his patriarchal blessing in 1896 and prior to his moving back to Bern in 1897. He was assigned as a ward teacher with Oscar Dalrymple, who he described as a good, faithful man, and they used to visit the entire ward of about 20 families. He served as a counselor in the Mutual Improvement Association and then as a counselor in the Sunday School presidency. He was called to go with Ira Campton each month to hold meetings with the 2 active families in Thomas Fork, now Raymond. He basically bears testimony of the importance of the gospel in he and Caroline's lives. In a tribute to his grandparents by Foster M. Kunz, included in Devereaux or Bud compilation, Foster quotes his Aunt Rosina, who was married to Benjamin William Kunz. My parents had no more than the necessities of life after we left our good home in Wardboro, but never once did I hear Mother complain that she had to give up a good home and a good livelihood to help someone else. Robert writes that after he moved down to Bern in the old John Kunz II home, his children came down with diphtheria, and he nearly lost 2 of them. But with the mercy of the Lord, together with medical science, they were saved, after which I was left broke. My property consisted of 2 teams, a harness, wagon, an old buggy, and 2 cows. Along with my reduced property, I owed my good friend Edward Burgoyne $250. During the summer of 1901, Robert moved his family to Sheep Creek, where he put up the hay for John III on shares, and he was able to secure enough hay to feed his livestock for the next winter. In August of that year, Robert was able to land a job working in a mine shaft in Sheep Creek for $2 a day and board for 10 hours' work. Robert felt the Lord had opened a way for him to exit and pay his debts when he received a call to the Swiss-German mission. The bishop informed the First Presidency of his large family and his financial circumstances, and he received an honorable release for the time being. We need to make a few comments here to clarify the various names used to identify the John Kunz III holdings in the Pegram area. When William J. says in his history that John III, his dad, moved his family in 1877 from Bern to the old Phelps Ranch on the Bear River, it was in the Pegram area. When David Hershey and Susanna Hershey rode from Cokeville to Pegram with John III in 1882 and got off the caboose and walked through the meadows to the cabin, it was to the same old Phelps Ranch being operated by John Kunz in the Pegram area. When Robert Schmid says he and William J. gathered cows in 1890 and took them to the Hubble on Bear River for the summer, it was to the same area in Pegram. When Robert moved his family to Sheep Creek in 1900, to put up John's hay on shares, it was in the same Pegram area. His family was staying in the Jode Phelps home. When John III moved his family back to Bern in the fall of 1882, he still came to the Phelps place he had been farming and dairying on for the previous 5 years. Different histories refer to this location by different names, but they are all referring to the same location on the Bear River in the Pegram area. When Robert got a job in August of 1901 in a mine shaft close to the ranch, he bought the Jode Phelps house from Jesse Perkins and moved a small cabin on the site and enlarged the house. Robert and Caroline's 9th child, O'Neill Rudger Kunz, was born there in November of 1901. Robert remained in that home working for the mine for 3 years. Elizabeth Myrtle was born while they were living at Sheep Creek, but because Caroline was expected to be confined, Robert took her back to Bern to Emma Caroline's home, and Myrtle was born in Bern the 19th of May, 1904, and died 5 days later. The mine failed, and Robert was again out of work, but he had lived and paid off his indebtedness. He bought his dad's house in Bern, but the family had not moved back to Bern as he was trying to sell his house in Sheep Creek. Robert was finally able to sell his house in Sheep Creek during the summer of 1904, and the family moved back to Bern into the John Kunz II home that he had purchased. After his move back to Bern, Robert was ordained a 70 by John Humphreys during the year of 1905. Robert repaired that home that his dad lived in, and that fall he broke up some of the acreage he had purchased with the house and planted it in fall wheat, which produced a splendid crop. He then, in 1906, got a job as a blaster on the Paris-Franklin Road, better known as the Thunder Bluff Road or the German Dugway. He was working for his brother Christian, who was awarded the contract to build a road from Paris to Franklin. While he was working that summer as a blaster on that road, he worked during some hot summer days and was getting some of his drinking water from melted snow from the drifts in the gorges, which damaged his health by drinking too much of it in the heat. The following winter, Robert and Caroline's youngest son, Delmer Irvin, was born in Bern on January 3, 1907. Robert then tells that he, because of many doctor bills and supporting his son Robert H. on a mission to the southern states, went to Williamsburg for the summers for 6 years and was able to pay his debts. He and his family at home were still living in Bern. We will revisit Robert, Caroline, and family later on. There are a few things that Ida K. Boss tells about her dad, Christian, that need to be included here to complete Christian's history. He was the third child in John II and Rosina's family of 10. Christian was born on December 26, 1846, in Schwanden, Bern, Switzerland. Looking after the animals, making cheese, and tending the large garden was a family affair. Christian's main responsibility was herding the goats in the mountains. The story is told that one day, while John and Christian were herding the goats, Christian fell from a cliff about the height of a 2-story building. Although he recovered completely, he remained unconscious for a long time, causing the family great concern. The boys liked throwing rocks at small pines and gathering alpine roses. Shortly after starting school, Christian was caught whispering and was punished by having to hold a block of wood in his mouth until another was caught whispering. When he wiped the block off on his sleeve before putting it in his mouth, he received a whipping. Christian was good at math and not so good at singing, so often he would teach lower grade math instead of singing with his own group. Christian began smoking while quite young, and one day helping a neighbor chore, the neighbor told him that he would give 100 francs if he had never started smoking. So Christian, being very impressed, never smoked again. At age 21, Christian received training in the Swiss military. At age 22, he contracted typhoid fever and was hospitalized. While he was sick, his weight dropped from 155 pounds to 90 pounds, and he lost all of his hair. While he was in the hospital with typhoid, his family joined the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Christian was baptized into the church by his brother John on May 12, 1870, just several weeks before emigrating to Utah.